All right. Destigmatize Mental Health Podcast, Season 4, Episode 6. I am here with Norma Garcia. Norma, welcome to the podcast. Of course, super excited to go ahead and do this episode. So, as stated in the intro, breakup and dating coach. You do a lot of it all. You do a lot of holistic approaches. Before we even get started, Norma, where can people find you?
Absolutely, yeah. So my Instagram handle is normally_healing. I also have my website, www.norma-garcia.com. It's a good place to start.
Awesome. Really cool place to go and find you. So let's get into it. Norma, is it difficult to, I guess the first question I have, is it difficult to date a breakup therapist?
I mean, both of those things, right? Like therapist, coach, right? It does have its challenges. It does have its challenges definitely because, right, I come in with this awareness, I come in with this like knowledge. So definitely like my standards, my expectations, right, definitely come through. But really just with all the wisdom and the knowledge that I have had within dating, it definitely it does make it challenging because sometimes it's hard to take the therapist out of the human part of me. Because at the end, right, I want to come into a relationship as a human. The therapy role of me is just part of, right, like this other identity that I have.
Right.
So there's definitely, both ends in terms of like how I show up, but also how people perceive, right, what dating a therapist may mean. A common thing that always comes up, it never fails, when I say I'm a therapist, it's like, oh, like, are you therapizing me right now? Like, what's my assessment? So
Right.
It's really about like coming in and setting these like not boundaries, but these expectations of like, I'm coming in as myself, right? Like, therapist hat, right? She's not here right now.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Even though I do drink the Kool-Aid and I do live by a lot of the things that I teach and I preach, right? But when I'm dating, like I just want to, be seen as a human, have fun, enjoy, and not feel like I'm working in that moment.
Right. Drink the Kool-Aid. I like that.
Yeah.
That's funny. All right, cool. So I know your practice mentions a cultural component, which is easy for us as Latinos and Latinas. However, this also transitions into other cultures outside of our own. Is that safe to say when it comes down to breakup, grief, and loss?
Absolutely. When we think of breakup, like breakup is a universal human experience that we all go through regardless of your culture, ethnicity, right? Where culture comes in is the way that we're conditioned, right? The messaging that we hear, from our families, from our culture, our beliefs, our values. So that begins to shape the form of way that we have relationships, the way that we even navigate breakups. And of course, there's some similarities, right, within cultures in terms of, again, like how it is that, we work with relationships and even just, our blueprints for relationships, right? Really also
Right.
from, our upbringing, our culture, our family. So it's really embedded in. So I think when, I work with my clients and I think about, their experience, it's also really important to understand the cultural aspect that influences the way that, again, we navigate in the relationship, but also when we experience a breakup and we go through the grief as well.
Right. Being a breakup and dating coach, what does a breakup coaching journey typically look like? And can you confirm that it goes beyond the idea of men ain't shit type of situation?
Yeah. So if I can just clarify, so in my services, right, I offer therapy and coaching, right? And so in both, I can support someone through a breakup. However, the approach that I'm going to support the client is going to look different, whether I'm their therapist versus whether I'm their coach. So what I mean by that, if a client is coming in to work through their relationship, their heartbreak as a therapist, right, I'm going to focus on, right, working through the underlying, right, mental health or any other things that are coming up, through the breakup, really like processing, sitting with the pain, the emotion, the grief. It's more about working through their past, right, to get them to their present, future, goals and whatnot. When I work with someone through my breakup coaching program, It's more of an accelerated kind of approach in which the focus is on actions. It's on really identifying what your goals are and getting you to those goals, right? So there is room for processing, right? But it's more about, right? How do we get you to move on from your ex? How do we get you to leave the relationship, right?
It seems more like if it's a solution focused approach more than
Yes,
anything.
absolutely. Solution and goal oriented. Typically, these clients are coming in when they're ready, right, to make the change.
And usually when you talk about leaving the relationship, does that mean or does that tap into the safety component? And as we're recording this episode, it's a little bit before October. October is Domestic Violence Awareness. So, and for anyone that may be listening to this and they may be going through a domestic violence approach, we definitely know that it's not your fault. We definitely know that there are so many variables that it comes down to towards the abuser, whether it's male or female, doesn't matter the gender, but the abuser, they're usually going through their own things and they may not be able to go ahead and process it. So then they end up projecting it onto their partner. So with that said, I'm assuming that your coaching services also kind of tap into that safety plan component. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. When we think about relationships, right, there's different, levels of relationships and type of relationships, whether it's healthy, unhealthy, right? There's all these different terms that we use, toxic, right, abusive. And so it's really also important, right, how it is that we are identifying these relationships, right? So a lot of it is psychoeducation, understanding, the relationship that you're in. Some clients come in because they're just outgrow their relationship, right? Values are not aligned. Most of the time it is because it is from an unhealthy relationship or there is some toxicity in it, in which then I help them, right, navigate what that is and help them come up with solutions or things that will be more aligned with the things that they want, right? If obviously there's abuse, right, that's a more intensive, right? That's really about safety, right? Creating safety. And safety just doesn't have to mean whether it's healthy or unhealthy, right? I believe that safety is a foundational part of a relationship, whether it's physical safety, emotional safety, and mental safety. But a lot of the work with these kind of relationships, it is about, right, helping clients understand what safety is, right? What is healthy and unhealthy? Because again, that can look different. If we talk about cultures again, that can look really different, right?
Right.
We talk about like gender roles and the roles that we're supposed to play in relationships, right? So
Of course.
it's very, very layered, right? There isn't just one approach on how to go about it. As therapists, as you know, like it's really important to really get a psychosocial assessment of everything that's going on, really break down the relationship and figure out what is going to be the best plan for the client.
Of course. Yeah. And for those that may not understand what, the biopsychosocial component may be, they're just biological components, whether they could be social variables. It could be social variables, whether you have friendships or not. When it comes down to breakups and, as we're talking about leaving the abuser, that may also lead towards whether there's isolation, if a partner, starts isolating you from your family. There's so many resources that exist. So I do encourage you to go ahead and check those resources out. And I'm happy to go ahead and also put some of those resources as part of our episode. But breakups they're a universal experience. But for many, it's a huge source of mental and emotional distress. From your perspective, what are some of the most common mental health challenges you see your clients facing, not just during, but after a breakup?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that I like to perceive breakups are, I feel, what for most is what gets you to actually work through your past. And what I mean by that, usually a breakup triggers your past wounds, right? And so with that, it's not just about navigating, right, the hurt and pain that's coming from that loss, because it also brings up and triggers other wounds that have been there, that are just being exacerbated within that breakup. It's kind of like the catalyst. And so things that can happen, right, are on a mental, physical, emotional level, right? When we experience,
Right.
right? Love is also like an addiction. So there's also like a physiological component that happens, right? Like the withdrawal, right? We think of like the chemicals that are depleted or we're not receiving anymore from that
Mm-hmm.
partnership, right? There's physical sensations, right? A lot of anxiety, depression. With that too, the emotional aspect, right? A lot of sadness, a lot of feeling empty and void. We think about our thoughts, right? Our thoughts of like, are we worthy enough, right? How come, we weren't chosen, or why why don't they want to be with me? So it also triggers a lot of like core beliefs that either have been there or have started from that specific, relationship. So I feel it impacts you in all your capacities, even spiritually, right? It gets you to sometimes question, right? Question
Right.
your source of, higher power or strength. Why is this happening, right? Like, how come? And it also really depends on like the type of breakup, like who broke up with who, the reasons that we broke up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether again there was abuse or not. So every breakup is different, right? However, there is common, experiences that we go through in terms of how it impacts, right? Our mental, emotional, physical well-being, as well as how we grieve.
Right. Even the biological component, the fact that you mentioned, whenever you are in a relationship, there are the components of, well, there is this serotonin, this dopamine that ends up happening,
Yeah.
that chemical release after being intimate with a partner, if that is the case for some couples. And all of a sudden that just no longer exists within the relationship. So that definitely takes a toll on within the relationship dynamics itself. And then that's where a lot of those questions start kicking in that you were mentioning. Along those lines, I feel that our mood does, it really does shift. I think about, whenever I go through a breakup, at least personally, as well as what some of my clients have shared, is that music it seems to be a sense of comfort for some people. And it seems that now more than ever, there are more and more breakup anthems to assist with the healing process. But also, that's also because, people relate to it so much because of the fact that they are able to relate to the pain that comes from the lyrics. I'm curious on your thoughts on this, as well as if we should even be listening to this, to these songs immediately after a breakup. Is, from your professional experience, do you feel like it's a good thing for us to listen to this, or, is it bad and
Yeah,
indifferent?
yeah. When we think about, right, going through a breakup, right, it's a really emotional, painful experience. And so especially in the beginning, like we just want to relieve that, right? It feels so uncomfortable. It's so intense that we want to do things to get that relief, right? And when we talk about, right, our senses, right, our auditory senses is one of our most powerful and soothing ways to help ground us, to normalize our experiences. And I think music does a beautiful job, or like artists do a beautiful job in sharing their experiences, right, through their lyrics, through the sounds, through the beats, and in terms of what they create with the songs. I think that, when I think about heartbreaks, right, and we think about artists, right, a lot of the most, even most, listened to songs like usually come from pain, come from heartbreak. So I think it's something that helps us to connect, right, especially if they are people that we idolize, people that we admire. When it comes to like the type of music to be listened to, I think there's benefits to both, right? Obviously, if you listen to sad music, right, or the songs that talk about the heartbreak, it can help empathize our experience, right? It can also, right, have us be more in our emotion, right? So I
For
think
sure.
both. What I like to do is a combination, right? Like it could be both, right? You can listen to that sad music. At the same time, though, it's also important to want to enhance and change your mood, right? So in that case, it's about also listening to music that it's more happy, cheery, right? Because you just don't always want to stay in that sad emotion. Even though a lot of people, yeah, when they're sad, they listen to sad music and it does help. However, it's
Absolutely.
also important to, right, focus on the things that you want more of, which is like happy music, cheery music, things are also, they're going to lift our spirit up.
For sure. It's great to go ahead and be part of a community, especially being understood and knowing that you're not alone. So listening to that music is great. And then being able to go ahead and post that and being able to have individuals, whether it's through social media, be able to go ahead and be like, man, this song hit so hard. You must be going through it. I'm a huge fan of music. I love listening to Spanish music more than anything. I was listening to Camila Fernandez, and man, someone hurt her for sure. But it's like, man, I was just, and I was thinking about it, as we prepared for this episode. I was like, man, individuals like her, Taylor Swift, being able to go ahead and just listening to like even 90s R&B music, that was a lot of the start of being able to go ahead and utilize art as a form of being able to go ahead and express one's emotion. And I think it's great and super valid.
I think it's beautiful. I think it's beautiful. And again, it's a way to connect, right? That we all go through this, right? Again, it doesn't matter your culture, your ethnicity, right? Whether you're famous or not, it's a human experience, right? And when we hear other people, right, talk about that and name it, right? It's so powerful. For me, it's interesting because I also gravitate to like Spanish music too. Like I love rancheras. I listen to, Vicente Fernandez, and some of their songs are just so like, they're sad and they're deep, and a lot of things come from love, right?
Absolutely.
And we talk about breakups, right? It's it is romantic partners, but it's also like breakups from like friendships, right? Even
Absolutely.
from family members, right? So breakups or loss, right, can happen in many different forms, not just like from a romantic partner.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the notions I like to go ahead and use, especially being, Latino myself and growing up watching novelas, I
Yeah.
feel like that caused us to go ahead and mistake chaos for love. I'm curious to know how truth that is from your perspective, and how do we as a culture grow past this? Because it's like I talk about the breakup anthems, but it's also like, well, when it comes down to novella specifically, and I always like to have this conversation with my friends, it's like, okay, well, we have the two protagonists and they hate each other for some reason in the beginning, and they fall in love, and there has to be all of this chaos just for there to be this wonderful wedding at the end. But it's like, well, did we really need to go through all that? But then I also feel like that could also, especially growing up, that could be a huge source of mental and emotional distress, especially as we navigate through these relationships. I'm curious on your perspective, and what are some of the common mental health challenges that you see your clients, kind of deal when it comes down to this, if any?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm glad that you bring that up, because I know for me personally, like I grew up in novelas. I was watching the novelas, and when, as I mentioned earlier, right, when we think about our blueprint, where do we learn about love, about relationships, right? This illusion, right, in terms of right love stories and the happy ending. And so, from our families, but definitely, from novellas, like you also get drawn into the characters. For me, it was like it creates this belief, right? This belief that there's hope, that there's this illusion, right? That at the end there is a happy ending. So I know for me, it did instill this belief of like, okay, like chaos is normal, right? If things don't work out, that it's okay because there is going to be a happy ending, right? And sometimes that can create like a false illusion, or it can get us to stay in unhealthy, right, relationships. And obviously, depending on what your upbringing was like and what was modeled from your parents, that can also add, right, to whatever was being perceived in this telenovelas. And a lot of these, especially like the men that come out in the telenovelas, like most of them were handsome, right? And the women were also like beautiful and gorgeous. So I think it also creates this idea of what the men should look like and what the women should look like, and the challenges that we, so it does normalize a lot of things. Now, obviously, growing up and being therapists and studying relationships and heartbreaks and all of that, right? It's about rewriting that narrative,
For sure.
rewriting it and deconstructing it in a way, right, that is going to be more realistic, right, with what's going to be in alignment with your values, right, and what's actually, like could actually be true. And this is also true for movies, right? Like I'm a rom-com movie girl, right? I fall for the storylines, right? So there's so many ways that society portrays relationships, right? And as we experience that, and it does bring up good emotions. At the same time, I think it also creates, again, like this illusion that may not always be true.
That's fair. Absolutely. It's common and easy to bring up past traumas into a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
How does that happen? And what are some of the consequences whenever one does bring those traumas into these relationships?
Yeah. So whenever it is right that we haven't dealt with those traumas, whatever patterns we have, whatever cycles we have, right, if we don't work through them, if we don't break them, right, they continue repeating in the way that the kind of relationships you're in, the kind of partners you're attracting, right? The same issues that keep happening and repeating, within relationships. So I'm a big believer that if you haven't done the work, or if you haven't, learned from those lessons, or really try to change your own patterns too, because it's a two-way street, right? It's their patterns, how they're showing up, and how you're showing up too. And sometimes it can be easy just to point the finger on the other person. There's also
Hmm.
a reflection of like, what's my role in this too? What part am I playing? And whether, yeah, there is, trauma is such a big word, right? And we can have a whole episode on what trauma is and how it shows up. But there's also, trauma that comes from relationships, right? In terms of, again, whether it's healthy or unhealthy, in the way that we're treated, the messaging that we're receiving, our core beliefs, right? So trauma can impact the way that our relationships flow. It can also impact, right? We even talk about attachment style, right? A lot of wounds that come up with relationships, especially if there is trauma, right? There's fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, right? And so those wounds continue to show up, right? Especially if those wounds come from our childhood or our adulthood. And when the breakup happens, guess what? It's going to bring up those wounds.
Absolutely. Yeah. It seems like, and I'll speak on behalf of my fellow gender, right? It
Mhm.
seems like men often carry a lot of emotional baggage
Mm.
from their developmental years
Mhm.
to their early adulthood. Sometimes that causes damage to their partner's lives due to a very high inflated sense of selfishness and ego. We experience, or we really want our partners to be our peace, yet when
Mm.
it comes down to relationships, we will inevitably always face strains from various psychosocial stressors after that initial honeymoon phase. We
Mm.
tend to want women to be logical like other men, but we often forget that we are drawn to, women. And I'm speaking in a very like heterosexual, format, which may not be applicable to everyone, but, for the sake of this conversation, let's just approach it from a heterosexual perspective. No, we tend to go ahead and be drawn to that emotional depth in the first place. Women usually embody a full spectrum of emotions, and I think that that's what men are usually attracted to. There are storms, waves, and tides, and then there's calm. And that could be from a various number of reasons. And that could go from a biological perspective, leading towards that menstrual cycle. And, or it could just be psychosocial stressors that could happen. But at the end of the day, that is the beauty of, our female counterparts. But at some point, many men seem to get tired of that emotional reality. The thing that they were first attracted to, it then tends to fade, and then men will look for reasons to go ahead and escape the relationship or end the relationship, kind of pulling the rug from underneath. And that's when that chaos starts happening because they really can't find their own calm during that storm. It seems like men want to go ahead and just want that peace, but the reality is that's not what we fell in love with. So I'm curious, Norma, what would you say to those men?
Yeah. I mean, it's, you bring up really, really good points, right? And there's so many different variables and factors, right? That's just, it's so many things are happening there. And yes, men and women, right, operate different. Men can be more logical, women are more emotional, right? I think at the end of the day, right, it's about how do you complement each other in the relationship, right? So even if that's happening, even if things are coming up for you, or things are drifting, or your emotions are shifting, it's how are you communicating? How are you letting your partner know what's coming up for you or what's not working for you? Right? Are we having those conversations? Right? Is there enough safety within the relationship to express, hey, this is what's going on. Like my feelings are changing, or we're not aligning anymore. Right. So part of that is, how are we communicating? Is there enough safety to be able to express our emotions? Right. Is there maturity with our emotions? Right. Are we validating each other, or are we invalidating? Right. Because a lot what happens too in relationships, right, is that when we don't know how to be empathetic, right, we can be dismissive in our emotions. And so that can create its own kind of imbalance. So to that question, I would say, first, obviously self-reflection. Okay, what's really coming up for you? Is it something coming that's about you and your past, or something that's coming up? Or is it really about this dynamic? Because I do feel we're mirrors to each other.
Hmm.
We mirror to each other, right? The things, the wounds, right? The things that perhaps are things for us to also work on, right? So I wouldn't just put it on the man, I'd also put it on the woman, right? To be able to, again, express, receive, and then come to some kind of, right? Because sometimes what happens is that within the partnership, one person already makes their decision without
For sure.
actually like trying to resolve it.
Yeah. I always like to approach the understand, whether it's right or wrong, doesn't matter. Just understand what is heard,
Hmm.
be able to go ahead and process
Yes.
the information that was given to you, and then afterwards be able to accept whether you want to go ahead and deal with it or not. But I mean, yeah, I really find, and I feel like it's important for me to go ahead and speak on behalf of men and be able to go ahead and challenge men because, I mean, I feel like a lot of Latino men, especially, it's difficult for us to be able to go ahead and be in a healthy relationship, and then it's just it creates this just negative taboo. So then I kind of go into this like mode of like, well, how do we solve this epidemic? Because it is kind of an epidemic for for our culture. I'm like, is it just easier to put chastity belts over every single man and call it a day?
Mm.
But I'm kind of curious. We've been focusing on this emotional labor men need to go ahead and do in relationships. But let's, and I do want to go ahead and flip it, because I think it is only fair. I was talking about the man, but now I want to go ahead and kind of maybe introduce the woman's perspective.
Mhm.
There are women who may use men as emotional placeholders,
Mm.
going out on dates, being able to go ahead and accept attention or resources without a genuine intention of building a secure relationship. This behavior can leave a man feeling used and confused. From your perspective as a dating coach, what's going on here? Or, could you speak on this? Why might women engage in this? And what advice would you give to go ahead and help individuals that may be doing something like this be able to understand the emotional impacts of
Yeah.
what that may do to others?
Well, I do believe, right, it falls on both men and women, right? I think
Of course.
have we each have a role, and we each have a responsibility, right, in terms of like how it is that you want to show up, right? Because I think what you're talking about can go both ways, right? Sometimes
Agreed.
men can act like the women act like the men, right? Especially when we think of feminine, masculine energy, right?
Right.
I think if we just, really take away even just the gender too, it's about like what's really happening, right? Like understanding the function, like for the women that are dating in that way, what's really coming up for them? Are they operating from a place of, are they doing this because they want to fill a void? Are they doing this because they want attention? Are they doing this because they can, right? Because
Right.
there's so many different reasons why a woman may be doing this, right? Or why a man, shows up at the way that they do. I think for anyone, right, it's really about, right, before you date, before you get into a relationship, it's really going in and seeing where you're at. Do you have the emotional capacity, right?
To even be in a relationship.
Right. Or what are your intentions? What are your intentions to date, right? Are you just casually because you just want to have fun? Again, you just like the attention, right? Or is it because you want to commit, right? I think intentionality also makes a difference. And again, I think both have a part, right? I talk to my women clients, and, they can talk about like, oh my gosh, men are this and that. I talk to my male clients, and they're, oh, but the women are, so I do feel there's a level that we're both kind of,
At
behave
fault.
the same way and at fault.
Yeah.
It's really, it starts individually, right? Looking within and figuring out like, okay, what's really happening? What are your patterns?
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
you're repeating. So I like to work with, even before I have someone date, really get connected to like, what are your intentions? Where are you at right now? What is your capacity, right? What is it that you're looking for? What happens when you get triggered, right? Because
For sure.
it's like, it's the way that you show up, it's going to affect the other person and it may ruin it for them too, and vice versa.
Yeah. I'm super curious about your journey. What brought you towards wanting to get into helping couples and families, being able to navigate, their experiences? Could you share a little bit about your journey and what led you to realize that talk therapy alone wasn't going to go ahead and help the couple dynamic or even the individual that may be going through a breakup? Yeah, I'd definitely love to learn more about you.
And for me, there definitely, like, there's a personal experience that comes with it, and there's also a clinical aspect, right? So I myself have also experienced like my own heartbreak, and that really set me in my own journey, right, to really work through, right, my wounds, right, work through the kind of men I was attracting, the kind of relationships I've been in, and really working through that pain, right? Like, I think the hardest thing is knowing what to do with this pain, how to channel it. So in me going through that process, and then just naturally, I kept attracting clients that were coming in with like relationship, marriage issues, right? So it's not just about going through a breakup. It's also about within their relationship. There's chaos, there's turmoil. And so it's been like a parallel process as like I was doing my own healing, trying different things, right? Going to therapy, right? Traveling, doing more like somatic work, like really going into my body and understanding, right, where my wounds are, where my emotions are. It's really been like a lifelong journey of, right, that it's just not one thing that works, right? It's about creating this recipe, right? Trying different things and pulling from different things, right? That got me closer to my values and what I stand for. And then also in that process, right, the way that I was supporting my clients, right, in terms of even just the specific modalities I was getting trained in, right? Especially going into, going from like a 9 to 5, right, working for the county outpatient clinics to then now having my own private practice. Even the way that I support my clients with their relationships and heartbreaks has also changed, right? Because now I also incorporate like a spiritual component, right? Before it was more like, okay, my mind, right? And then I was like, oh, wait, but I got to work on my body. And then now it's like, but wait a minute, what about my spirit and soul? Like that matters too. So all of
Mm,
this, right, has taken years. It wasn't a one-time thing. It wasn't just 1 year, right? It's been everything that has been compiling that makes sense. Then I kind of bring the holistic approach. And for me, knowing what it took for me to get to where I'm at, I want to ensure that women, men are able to be in that healthy relationship, right? That are able to heal and be their authentic self, right? And that they are able to break, right, the cycles, the blueprint, right? Rewrite their life story. Rewrite their love story, and really have that happy ending that we all want.
right. Yeah, no, that's solid. I like to, whenever I engage in my couples therapy, one of my favorite activities to go ahead and do with couples is being able to go ahead and navigate what's called a love ritual,
Mhm.
something that an individual could go ahead and do every single day, whether it's 5, 10, 15 minutes. What is a realistic expectation that the couple could do during that time to go ahead and be able to go ahead and connect with one another? So yeah, being able to go ahead and find that, that happily ever after, I think that's a pretty wonderful way of looking at it.
And it looks, for everyone, it looks different, right? Every relationship different. Two people, like, relationships are hard. It's two individuals coming together, right? And I think what happens is that sometimes we go in with the mentality of like, this person is going to complete me. This person's going to make me. They're going to be like my everything, right? And I've even had to rewire that. And I also help my clients with that. Is like, how can you show up as your individual self and together
Right.
complement each other, bring the best out of each other?
Absolutely. Being able to go ahead and I think that this is very important for people to understand that happiness doesn't come from another individual. It really comes from oneself,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
And I think just kind of going into that, as someone who is, I mean, I still, even as a therapist, with all the skills that I know and whatnot, I definitely still struggle with being able to find myself and who I want to be in this stage in my life. And it's not because I want, because it's simply because I know it doesn't make it easy. Being on the inside, it's difficult versus all the skills. It just makes it easier for me to implement those skills for sure. But I feel like a lot of individuals will lie and say that they're okay when they're not. And that could show up in a relationship.
Mhm.
The words one says will be one thing, but the energy and the behaviors are another. How important is it to have a safe space for one's feelings in a relationship? And how can couples create that from your perspective?
Yeah. Like I said earlier, right? Safety is one of the most important things to have in any relationship, right? When there isn't safety, it's going to be really hard to show up. It's going to be really hard to be honest, right? And sometimes that's within yourself, right? Sometimes because of trauma, because of mental health, right? Outside factors, there isn't safety within ourselves. So we don't even trust
Hmm.
ourselves, right? Because we don't know how, right? Or there's this, or our fears show up, right? So it's a two-way thing, right? It's about safety within yourself. How do you create safety within you? Trust, right? How do you validate yourself? How do you keep yourself safe? How do you regulate yourself? I think we always have to start there first. And then, right? So if two people are coming in with their safety, right? It's going to be much easier, not that it's easy, right? Much easier to then create the safety together because you both are able to understand the importance of safety, right? However, let's say if, they're coming in with no safety, right? Yeah, there's still a way to figure it out. But again, it's going to have to be as a team, right? Because when there's no safety, we're going to be afraid to say how we feel, right?
Hmm.
When something is bothering us, right? We're not going to talk about it. I know I myself, when I didn't feel safe in my relationship, I would shut down. So I'd be like, I'm fine. What's wrong with you? Tell me, talk to me. I'm fine. I'm fine. And that's because I didn't feel safe. I didn't know how to express
Hmm.
myself. And
Yeah,
that's a lot of like tension and problems come.
for sure. Yeah.
We don't feel
Yeah,
safe
I think
enough to share how we're feeling or something's bothering us or set boundaries.
for sure. I think if we're both getting vulnerable, I've definitely been in a relationship where I would show up in various ways in my relationships, but when it came down to the communication factor, I
Mhm.
think because of how I am very direct, it was difficult for a lot of my partners to be like, hey, I could talk to you. And one of my relations specifically, I remember that she would tell me, in my mind, I thought that I had this conversation with you. And in my mind, I would be able,
Mhm.
you and I were talking, but it was difficult for her to go ahead and express that verbally to me.
Mhm.
And that was very difficult for me to be able to go ahead and, to really get a hold of, because of how in so many ways I would show up in that relationship. But because of whether it was our age, or because of, whatever that individual had gone through in that part of
Yeah.
their lives, that it was difficult to be able to go ahead and show up in that part of the relationship. So I definitely encourage anyone that may be going through something similar to that to just be able to reflect on what it is that they're going through, and be able to go ahead and process that, and really come to terms on if you're even able to go ahead and have those conversations with your significant other.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And of course, right, if that's something that you need more support with, right, that's where we would also encourage, right, like maybe seek a therapist or work with a coach, right? I think part of it too is being able to like recognize, right, where there's areas of improvement and how it's okay
Hmm.
to ask support for that. I know I had to do that for myself. I couldn't figure this out alone, even with all the skills, like I'm a therapist, like I had to go through my own process, right? And I'm sure, you have too. And a lot of, therapists, like they say, our therapists have a therapist, right?
For sure. I don't think that there's a person in the world that could go through this by themselves. I think that it takes a lot of work and a lot of being able to go ahead and just understand oneself in ways, because I think throughout the ages, and again, I think cultural plays a huge factor in
Absolutely.
our decision making process.
Yeah. Yeah.
With that said, that also kind of goes into various other parts of our lives. I feel like there are beautiful things when it comes down to one's culture, but
Mhm.
there are so many things that our culture got wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that communication is one of those areas,
Mhm.
especially in the Hispanic Latinx culture.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And again, I mean, we don't talk about our feelings, right? We don't show affection. A lot of clients coming in, like, I don't know how to, tell my partner how I feel. I don't know how to tell them that I love them. So it's really going back again, like to your blueprint, right? I love to call it the blueprint, right? Because that's how we start creating our narratives, our beliefs, and then those beliefs continue to show up in our adult life until we recognize them and shift them and, rewrite them. And I feel that relationships is kind of an underrated thing. Like I don't think we talk enough about relationships and the importance of healthy relationships, right? Even the relationships with our family,
Absolutely.
because that's where
Yeah.
it comes from, right? Parents are our models, right? Our caregivers are the first people that we learn from.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a huge part of it. Being able to go ahead and show up in that aspect of the relationship. And I think a lot of just really taboo phrases like
And
you still got to continue dating even when you're in a relationship. There's a cliche to it, but
yeah,
there's also a reality towards it.
yeah.
Um, towards all that. But
And even
um,
I can say like just the expectations, right, of a woman, of a man, right, in terms of like when you're supposed to get married, when you're supposed to have a family, and if you're not there, right, the judge. So there's also pressure, and sometimes that pressure from our family, from society, from culture, can put us in situations, right, or
absolutely.
situations or relationships that we probably need not to be in.
Facts. I
Mhm.
do want to segue into something that you utilize within your services. You use a blend of somatic therapy
Yes.
and sound bath practices. For our listeners who may not be familiar with these, can you explain how these practices focus on the body and sounds, how they can help an individual heal from
Mm,
even a broken heart?
yeah, yeah. So again, when I talk about mind, body, and soul, right? A lot of, even just like talk therapy, it's about just talking about, right, our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions on an intellectual level, right? And so the somatic, soma means the body, right? So being able to take that and connect with their body, right? So a lot of us are really disconnected with our body, right? We may know how to identify, I feel sad, I feel anxious, right? But when we don't connect it to our body, right, we're not experiencing what that is within our body. We're not allowing those emotions to breathe or exist, right? Instead, we avoid, we suppress. So, a lot of the
Mhm.
somatic work that I do with my clients is getting them into their bodies, right? Getting them to recognize, how did that feel? What were the sensations? What came up for you? Where in your body did that feel that? And once you also bring that connection, there's more awareness. And with that awareness, then we can talk about the interventions, right? What does your body need in that moment? What is that body trying to communicate? I do feel that our emotions and our body cues are teachers. They're teaching us something, they're communicating something. And so when we connect to the body, it helps us listen to that. And there's different there's different ways to connect to the body and also to be able to sit with your emotions and release your emotions, right? With a sound bath, right, which is something a newer addition, to my services that I have found really impactful is that, a sound bath is an immersive meditative experience, right? Sometimes, meditating can be hard for many, right? I think there's also, we need to, meditation doesn't always mean the same thing, right?
Right.
And through the use, going back to music, auditory, right? Allowing sound, right? Especially with like the bowls and the instruments that I use, each instrument has its own vibration, its own frequency. And as those, as that travels through your body, right? A sound bath journey, meaning like you're really going through a journey through sound, and the way that the sound hits you, the way that it moves through your body, it allows you to go from a very like hyperactive to a more meditative, deeper place, where in that process, right, you can either relax, you reset your nervous system, you let go of any pain, any emotion, right? It's really an emotional experience as well, especially, with the sound bath that I do. I make it really intentional, right? So what is the client, what are they intending from the sound bath? And the way that I use this specifically with heartbreaks, right? A lot of clients want to let go. They want to, release their ex. They want to stop thinking about them, right? There's so many things that they want to do. So through the sound bath, right, we set that intention of connecting to their body. And as the sound is moving through, right, they're able to work on releasing some of that. It's really powerful experience. If anyone hasn't done one, I would highly encourage it. It's not just for breakup, it's for anything. Really thinking about it's like a reset, right? It helps with sleep, it helps with your anxiety, if you're stressed, it brings clarity. For some people, they mentioned that they get visions or they see colors, or sometimes their ancestors even come through. So it could also be a really spiritual journey. So I like to incorporate, right? Especially if we want to get more into like a deeper state of connection, right? Really connect with your body and learning what it is that your body is experiencing. Because as we know, right, like trauma, emotions are stored in your body.
Yeah.
Stuck in your body. And so these are ways to help release and give room to breathe, right?
Yeah, I think that's honestly beautiful to first and foremost. I think that, as quirky as that may sound to some people, honestly, I think that it's really interesting to reflect on.
Mm-hmm.
And I would encourage our listeners to go ahead and just think about, well, when you're listening to a particular song and all of a sudden you start crying, that's not for no reason. One, it could be the lyrics, but also just the vibrations, as you're mentioning. I think that's huge. And there are certain artists and albums that could go ahead and tap into certain emotions.
Yeah.
For me, a lot of Bad Bunny's albums, surprisingly, would tap into those feelings for me.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I'm not from Puerto Rico, I could definitely understand the pain
Yeah.
that a lot of Puerto Ricans feel when it comes down to gentrification, when it comes down to just being able to survive hurricanes year after year, the devastation of just colonization. It's definitely impactful. So there are definitely some, and it's interesting. I have these conversations a lot when it comes down to just Bad Bunny himself,
Mm-hmm.
but it's really interesting to go ahead and understand and take a deep dive into even those vibrations that tap into that tap into the body. I think also when there are certain songs that they give you goosebumps, quote unquote, your body's talking to you.
Yes. Yeah. No, yeah. Again, like it's all about, right, our senses. Our senses are so powerful in terms of what it is that how we're connecting, how we're experiencing things, right?
Right.
And a sound bath would not be for everybody, right? But it's really like reflecting and figuring out like, well, what may work for me, right? And giving it a chance. And if it does, great. And if it doesn't, it's okay, right?
Yep.
Not everything works, right? Not everything is going to work for everybody, and that's okay.
Yep. Don't bug it till you try it.
Yeah.
What are some like funny or quirky self-care tips that you've picked up from your own journey, from working with clients and even doing it on your own that you feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I connect a lot with dancing, right? So even being able to just have like a solo dance party, putting music on, and it's also cultural, right? Like movement, dancing, being silly, right? Shaking, right? So sometimes I'll have my clients do like things that feel weird or uncomfortable, right? Shaking, moving, right? But when you do that, right, it's also tapping into play and being silly, right? That in itself is healing, right?
Absolutely.
We get so stuck on like being serious, our professions, or this or that, being adults. but that child in us lives within us. And we also have to allow that child to come through. So any opportunity I get, to do something silly, even things like doodling, drawing, right? Roaring, right? Like doing deep breathing with some roars, right? Things that I know for me were uncomfortable too. I'm like, what am I doing? But the more that I would tap into it and allow myself and give myself permission, right? You have to give yourself permission to let loose, to just be. Even just those small things can be so impactful, right?
For
So
sure.
silly play, yeah. And even just something as simple as like affirmations, right? I look in the mirror sometimes and be like, yeah, Norma, like you are a baddie, like even things like that, like the way that you talk to yourself, the way that you show up, the way that the clothes that you wear, right? Everything is a form of expression, right?
Absolutely.
It doesn't have to be a super like technical like skill or, it's just tapping into your human, silly, fun, adventurous, right? Like all the things that we hide, right? Because maybe there's shame, there's trauma, right? And so being able to just tap into this higher version that we all have and want to be.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's pretty awesome. I'm curious, what are some red flags in dating that people often miss? And how does your coaching help them identify and address those patterns?
Yeah, I love this topic. Because sometimes red flags become yellow flags and are green flags, right? And also, I think red flags are subjective, right? They can be subjective.
Yeah.
A red flag for me may not be a red flag for someone else. I think it's also connected to like, values, like what's important for you. But a lot of red flags that I see have to do with like the speed of the dating process, right? The love bombing, right? Even just in terms of like how fast the dating is going, the things that the person is saying, right? Especially when, somebody is going really strong, right? Is already like telling you all the things that you want to hear. In dating, it's about really being grounded and knowing your intentions and also trusting your intuition. So if there's something that doesn't feel right, that I'm questioning, that to me is invitation to ask myself, okay, what's coming up for me, right? And when I think of a red flag, I think of it as, is this behavior something that happened once and then we're able to like correct it? Or is that behavior telling a story? Is that behavior telling something about their character? That's how I distinguish whether it's a red flag or whether it's like a one-time thing, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. For
A
sure.
lot of things we can, go into like, specifically like what are the red flags, right? But the best one that really comes up again is like love bombing. That's like a big one that a lot of my clients come in with, right? And also like trusting themselves.
Yeah.
Trusting themselves in terms of like how it is that they are dating. And so with all my clients, I really work with like first setting intentions. What are your intentions in dating, right? What do you value? What are your non-negotiables, right? Because also your non-negotiables can also tell you, right, whether something could be a red flag or not, or whether it's just something that's not in alignment.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love the non-negotiable conversation. I call those the pillars.
Yeah.
What are your pillars? Yeah. For sure. I finally want to talk about healing at the root. What does that mean to you? And how does your work help people move from a place of simplicity and surviving heartbreak to truly transforming their lives?
Yeah. So healing at the root, so thinking about, when I help my clients try to visualize what this is, I like to use like a tree as an analogy, right? When we think of a tree, right, it's rooted to the ground. And so when we think of other roots, right, it's the really embedded, really grounded. And so a lot of the, that I do with my clients is understanding, right, what are the wounds, right? What are the deep rooted wounds, pains, narratives, right, that are happening that continue showing up? So it's also looking at the patterns, looking at the cycles, like what is repetitive, right? And that could be from a mindset level, like what are the thinking styles, right? It could be behaviors, right? What are the behaviors that are repetitive? and really understanding what the root is, right? Is it because there's a core belief that it's coming from, right? Whether it's, again, a specific, learned behavior or habit, right? So it's really, getting them to a deeper place and understanding like where it's coming from. And sometimes we may not know where it's coming from, right? A way that I like to work through this also, I do also do brain spotting. So that's a way that I do help clients kind of get more connected to like deeper parts of themselves, like shadow work, right? All of that. Those are different interventions to help someone get to like the root of what's happening. And even if we can't get to the root, right, we just work with, okay, what do we know? What do we know? What do we want to change? And how can we get there, right? Because also I know a lot of, clients come in with like, I want to know why. And sometimes,
Right.
we're not going to understand the why, right? So it's about like, let's start with what we know and how to move forward. But if we can get to the root of things, right, especially looking at your child, at your past, at your childhood, right, that's why the biosocial assessment is so important. We gather information from when you're a child to your adulthood and everything to really gather, right, information of what potentially could be going on. And sometimes within sessions, right, depending on interventions, like it just comes through. The aha moment comes through, like, oh, that makes sense. This came from, right?
Right.
Always actively working on the why, but it comes with the healing. It comes with the process, right? It comes with being vulnerable.
For sure. I think another important piece to the why component is really understanding not just that there may not be a why, but if there is a why, that may be out of your control. The why may come from another. It may come from the other individual, the other half in the relationship.
Yeah.
And when the relationship ends, there are some individuals that may not want to give you that why. I definitely encourage those individuals to go ahead and try to work towards breaking that cycle, because at the end of the day, that why is warranted.
Yes. And specifically with a breakup, right, it really shows up like your wounds, right? Your attachment wounds, your abandonment wounds, your rejection wounds. That's kind of like the root usually, right? And then with also understanding that things happen to you, right? Like you're saying, like things happen to you and they may not be out of your control. But it's also being able to move through like that victim, right? Like, yes, things happen to you, but now how do you, right, take ownership and control of how you want to move forward?
Right. Absolutely. As we wrap up, if there is one key message or piece of advice that you'd want to give our listeners, essentially a takeaway about destigmatizing mental health when it comes down to breakups, what would that be?
There's so many things I can say, breakups, right? Relationships ending, relationship struggles, like really affect our mental health, right? And so what I really want you all to know that regardless of what you're going through, right? Even if it's not a breakup, that you matter, right? And you deserve to be your authentic self. You deserve to have the relationship that you want, right? You deserve to have, joy in your life. And if that is something that is currently not happening, right, I encourage you to lean in. And whether it means seeking support, whether it means, right, finding sources of strength, right, really taking action in changing that. I do believe that you all have the capacity to grow and to heal and to really become the version that you want to be. It's scary, right? It takes effort. It takes really looking at yourself, right? I promise you that once you do that, right, your future self will thank you.
Absolutely. I appreciate that you said that. That's something that I always tell my clients, being able to go ahead and think about their future self and what that may look like for them. Norma, once again, how can people connect with you? How can people find you?
Yeah, so on social media, at my Instagram, you can find me at normally with one L, NORMALY_healing. You can also find me on my website where it has more information in terms of my services, www.norma-garcia.com. Of course, you can find me on Ramon's podcast.
Appreciate that. Anything else that you'd like to add before we conclude? Anything that I didn't ask you that you would like to add on?
I think, there's so much that we did cover today, and from today's conversation, you take whatever resonated with you, right? Not everything that we don't have all the answers, not everything may apply to you, but whatever did resonate, I want you to lean into that and really reflect. And again, that you're in control. You're in control, and that you can have that telenovela, right? Happy ending, your own version of it, right? But really, it starts with you. It really starts with you. So thank you, Ramon, for having me. It was such a pleasure. Thank you to all of those that will be listening. I think there was a lot of, valuable information, psychoeducation also that we shared in today's episode. So, just thank you for allowing me to just speak on more about relationships and heartbreaks and mental health and what it means, to our culture and everything that, that impacts us. So thank you so much.
Of course. From someone from Bakersfield, I always pass the grapevine, and I consider everything that after the grapevine LA. But I know people from LA get offended when it comes down to that. I'm curious to know, what part of LA are you from? Where could people, possibly go to that area of LA and possibly even sign up for one of your classes?
Absolutely. So I specifically live in the San Fernando Valley, which is part of LA County. A lot of my services are virtual. However, I do hold sound bath events that are community out in Los Angeles area. And those you can find on my Instagram.
Awesome. Well, that's pretty awesome. And I definitely want to thank you for your time. And that's it. That's a Destigmatize Mental Health Podcast, Season 4, Episode 6, highlighting breakup coaching with Norma from Amalu Therapy and Wellness. You can share this episode and listen to past episodes of Destigmatize Mental Health Podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Norma, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.